Hey everyone, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2014 Tiffin Allegro Motorhome, we're going to be showing you how to install the SumoSprings Rear Helper Springs. But before we get into that, let's take a minute. We'll check these out and make sure they're going to be right for you. This is what the SumoSprings can look like installed on your coach, and we just have our wheels off so we can have a much better look at what's going on and really show you guys how these work. But more or less, it's an extremely simple component, but a very effective one. What these are going to do is attach to your leaf spring pack, all right, and then the top bracket attaches to the frame, and this kind of closes that gap and fills that void there. So what happens whenever the wheels are on the ground and everything and the suspension is loaded, this is going to take some of that weight off of the factory suspension. It's an additional helper spring that's going to provide more support. And if you're watching this, chances are really good, you haven't had the greatest experience driving these big coaches, huge boxes going down the road, really top heavy, and a lot of times it's not the most comforting drive. So any enhancement that you can do is well worth it. They all work out really well. And this one is no different here. From personal experience, what I found these helping the most with is kind of a good all-around improvement, if that makes sense, right? So what these will really help out with a lot is body roll. So if the coach feels kind of top heavy, right, when you make those turns, it's super slow and leans and kind of all over the place. These will help to contradict that, right? So if the coach starts to lean, that spring will compress and it naturally wants to come back up, right? And so it's going to force the motorhome straight again. And I've also noticed a big improvement with these helping out with the shocks and everything. So like if you were to hit a bump or a pothole or a big divvy in the road where it kind of slams down like that, these definitely absorb some of that shock, if you will, and help keep the tires planted on the ground. One of the nice things about these is they're progressive, okay? So they'll get firmer for the heavier the load, all right? So let's just say, for example, if your fuel tank was almost empty and all your water tanks might be back here and they were all empty, right? That's a lot of weight. And if that's the case, these won't compress as much and provide you with support you don't really need. But on the other hand, if you were to fill up the tank, all the tanks and everything really add a bunch of weight back here, the more that these compress, the stiffer that they would get and provide you with that additional support. That way they'll really try to do their best job to keep everything level and prevent swaying and that body roll and things of that nature. One of the best things that I like about them is the fact that they're maintenance free. Once you get them installed, you don't have to think about it, right? You don't have to mess with them or make adjustments or nothing like that. Trying to stay on top of motorhome maintenance is enough, so by not having to add one more thing to the list is definitely a nice benefit. We do get a lot of people asking if they're able to use other suspension enhancements, and I definitely understand it. It's really popular. You do one enhancement, you kind of get going on the rest of them because these do make a huge difference. And today we have a perfect example. Not only do we have our SumoSprings on, but we also installed a rear anti-sway bar. This one's made by Hellwig, and it's going to be a great addition to the SumoSprings. You'll maximize your stability and your performance. It's kind of surprising to me that a lot of these coaches aren't just putting this type of stuff on from the factory, because it does make that much big of a difference. Everyone's really happy with the results. Tightens everything up. Motorhome feels a lot better. So if this is something that you want to do, by all means you can. That said though, if you're going to be installing this yourself, the sway bar you definitely want to put on before your SumoSprings, because a lot of times you might have some interference issues, if you put the Sumos on first and then try to do the sway bar, so on and so forth. To begin your installation, we're going to be here at the back of our motorhome working where our axle is. And first thing you want to do is jack the motorhome up to where the wheels are going to come off the ground. That way the suspension is completely hanging free. And of course, when you do this, use your safety measures, chalk your front tires, use jack stands, so on and so forth. Removing the wheels is optional, but just to allow us to see a little bit better and give us more room to work, I took ours off. We can grab our SumoSpring now, and the top side of it is going to look like that. Right? You're going to have 4 holes in a diamond shape. You want these 2 holes, to be in line with the side of the motorhome there. And then this upper bracket, those 2 holes in it, are going to line up with those 2 holes. So we'll set that in place like so. You have 2 of these bolts. We'll go ahead and get both of these started hand tight. Take a 9/16 and tighten them down. Then if you flip this over, we're going to have 1 hole there. And you can take this lower bracket, all right, and you want this portion of it to face towards the front of the motorhome. All right, so we'll set that on like that. Take another one of those bolts, and with this one, we're gonna snug it down, but not completely tighten it. We just want to be able to maneuver this a little bit, that way we can get everything lined up. We can take our assembly now, and this is going to set on the leaf spring. And you have your center portion here. The SumoSpring is going to go towards the front of our coach. So that'll just set in place like that, and you want this little hooked piece. It's going to, just as a visual here, it's going to hook, press up against the back of the U-bolt there. So we'll roughly get this in place, just like that. So roughly hold this straight in position, and then we'll just take a marker, and I'm just going to put a dot there in the center, the very bottom hole on each side, just as a reference. And with that done, we can get this piece out of our way. We'll grab a measuring device now, and you can reference your instructions, and you want to measure from the top of the frame down. And there's our little dot there as our reference point. It honestly looks like it's about where we need to make our mark. So we'll make a mark there. And the same thing over on this side. We can set our assembly back on now, and line up those new marks that we made with the very bottom holes. And I'm just going to mark all of them on each side here. So where you made your marks, you want to look behind the frame for any clearance issues. If you got brackets or a ton of lines or anything like that behind it. And we're all clear. So we're going to use the bottom and top hole on this side. Looks like we'll be doing probably the same for that set of holes as well. And if you do happen to have some lines or anything that are relatively close, one thing you can do is take a block of wood, a 2x4 or something, and kind of put it behind there. That way if you drill through and it happens to go too far or anything, you'll just hit the wood, right? Not tear up a line. So, the frame's pretty thick steel, so I like to use a smaller bit, kind of work my way up in 1 or 2 stages. So we'll go ahead and get all these pre-drilled. 4 of our holes drilled out. You know, we did the same thing over here, the top and bottom. And when you're drilling through thick steel like this, you know, you want to use lower speeds and higher pressure as opposed to just wide open, light pressure. That's a real quick way to burn up your drill bit. So that's what my recommendation is. And since we have some exposed bare metal now from drilling the holes, I'm just going to come back with a little spray paint, give them a coating. That way, keep them protected against rust and corrosion. So get this on there, give them a minute or two to dry. After letting the paint dry for a minute, we'll take our assembly again, put that in place, and a lot of times one side will line up perfectly, like this one here, and so we're just going to take these bolts and put them through there. But on the other side, you know, the holes are below, the holes in the bracket are below the holes in the frame. So instead of just kind of lifting it up like we did when we were figuring out our marks, you know, getting it close, I want to really make sure that this is going to be in the correct positioning and everything. So what you can do is take a floor jack and jack this up enough to, usually don't take much, enough to get those holes to line up a lot better. Once you get those holes to line up, and take 2 more of these bolts, and run them through the bracket and through the frame. And then on the back side, where they come through the frame, we're going to put on these flange nuts on all 4 of the bolts. With all of them in place and hand tight, we can tighten them down. So I have a 9/16 socket, 9/16 wrench. Put the wrench on the nut back here to prevent it from spinning while we tighten these down. Now we can take these longer carriage bolts, drop those through, and you want the square portion on the head of the bolt there to actually go down into that square opening. Got one on each side. And then you can take this strap here, all right, and put the bolts through it. Push it up against the bottom of the leaf spring, and then take one of the flange nuts and get one started on each side here. We'll come back with a 9/16 and snug them down. And with these, you know, I like to run them down for a few seconds on this side, and then go over to this side, and so on and so forth, to kind of draw this up evenly. With everything snug now, that bolt that we left loose on the bottom, the one underneath, now we want to come back to that and tighten it down. And lastly, now we want to make sure to come back with a torque wrench and tighten down all the hardware to the amount specified in the instructions. Once everything is torqued down, what you're going to do is just repeat that exact same process over on the other side of your motorhome. Once you do the other side, if you happen to take your wheels off, go ahead and get those reinstalled, and don't forget to torque them all the way down. But with that done, that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the SumoSprings Rear Helper Springs on our 2014 Tiffin Allegro Motorhome.